You folks, please welcome back Avner Shavit. Thank you for joining us. We'll have a quick conversation. We're a little. This is our soft screening, so we could be informal. You were seeing this for the first time.
Yes.
What did you think?
I learned a lot. I didn't. I mean, unfortunately, mostly the negative things, like the story that Hani Nachmias, told about the filming of Buba. I'm hearing it for or the story about Salah Shabati and Peter Pan. I'm hearing it for the first time.
And I do think it was brave of them in this film to not only, they didn't paint him as a perfect person, and they brought in Hani Nachmias, that one actress who is also has her own place as a Israeli legend, and she's really bringing in a really troubling perspective too.
Hani Nachmias, she's like Miss Rachel today. Like every Israeli kid grew up on her. So she's very famous. But there are other stories about him, he sexually assaulted or harassed other actresses and women. So it's just like one story out of many. But also, unfortunately, it was normalized in Israeli film, and Uri Zohar, Arik Einstein. Every big star, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s would sexually assault and harass the women around them.
It's definitely was part of an unfortunate part of the culture that has hopefully improved and has changed from what I hear.
Today, if an actor sexually harasses or assaults, an actress, he's immediately fired. But that was like 30, 40 years ago.
It took a big case with Ivgi, of course, that I think really was like kind of the Me Too moment in Israel. But getting back to, of course, Ze'ev Revach's career, the film does a great job in just tracing, kind of going film by film of the ups and downs of his career. It's amazing how quickly he took off. That's a part of what I didn't realize about him. He didn't have to fight his way to the top. He kind of started on top.
Yeah. Also, I never thought about it before watching this film. It's true. Yeah. It was immediate.
And I think it goes back to what you were saying at the beginning, is his talent. He's just. I don't know if the audience felt it, but just his presence. I mean, there's nobody else like him.
Yeah, I mean, he was so expressive. That's why I always compare him to Louis de Funès and Jerry Lewis. Because I think his face was so malleable. I think he was and probably will forever be the most expressive actor in the history of Israeli film. And then you could have asked, okay, so if he was so talented and so expressive, why did he only do comedy? But he didn't. He did dramas, and he excelled as a dramatic actor. The problem was that, obviously in Israel, I think in most other countries, the public doesn't prefers comedies and not dramas. Maybe more so in Israel because what the audience needs is escapism. There's so much grief and sorrow, so the audience is looking for comedies. So they were mostly looking for him in comedy movies, but he did some dramas, and he excelled. And I think the film leaves out some of his best dramatic performances. For example, what's not mentioned in the film, maybe because they didn't have time, they had to edit out, is that he was part of what I think is the best Israeli film of the last decade, Get.
He was in Get.
He was in Get. He was
part of. I didn't remember him in Get. He was in that other film, another about the home for seniors.
The farewell party,
the farewell party,
which he won. He won the Israeli Oscar for that film. Was his last important award. Also, I don't know if you know, but the farewell party was turned to a successful stage play. But also, there's an American film based on the farewell party. So it's a very acclaimed film. And then he did Get, which premiered in Cannes. It was the opening film of one of the sidebar competitions in Cannes. Was nominated for the Golden Globe. So again, a very acclaimed film. And he wasn't like the lead actor, but he was an important actor. And he also did, I think that's his last film. He did voice acting for The Legend of Destruction. Yeah, and I think...
Which was here last year.
Yeah, and he lived long enough to see Israel destroyed again. So at least he lived long enough to... to witness that.
We'd love to make you a part of this conversation, take any questions from you. I'll say also, I think there's a question up on top, and that it's rare for an actor he was kind of in. I mean, the Barekas films, his early films, were cult classics. They weren't mainstream classics until later. Originally, they were, very certain crowds saw them, and for somebody who is a star in the cult classic world to make it also into the mainstream world, to be such a mainstream star, and to be able to direct, produce, write everything is rare.
I want to give you an example of how the establishment, the media, look down on these Barekas films. This documentary quotes one review, but the most famous negative review of a Barekas film was published in the 70s. I think it was in one of the major newspapers, and the critic, who was an Ashkenazi Jew, wrote, "Today he watched the Barekas film, and he said, today I walked in a movie theater in Tel Aviv, and I thought that I'm in Syria." So this is how the media looked down on. For them, it was it was trash. It was dangerous. It was like anti-culture. It was anti-Israeli. Vulgar. But worse than that. And there's just one more thing I wanted to say, which is I think a very important, a very important thing I want to say about Ze'ev Revach is that he was, and I think it's briefly mentioned in the film, is that he was more than everything, he was a proud Zionist. If you ask me what defined him as a person, as an artist, he was a Zionist. And I think his most important film, his most epic film, is A Stroke of Chance, Tipat Mazal, Brand de Chance. You can watch it on YouTube if you speak French. It's on YouTube with French subtitles. And it's the most Zionist film I've ever seen. More than Exodus, more than, you name it. Because, the film is about, he has to choose between France and Israel. And he can live in Paris, the City of Lights, Champs-Élysées, all that. Eat baguettes and whatever. And he chooses Israel. Why? Because he's a Zionist. And I think the message of the film is very clear, which is, if Israel is as a Jewish person, Israel is your home. And so Ze'ev Revach, and I think that's missing from the film. Ze'ev Revach, I think, is the most proud Zionist filmmaker, I think, of all time. He for him, like, his Zionism is crystal clear. It's not ambiguous. Usually in Israeli films, Zionism is ambiguous. For him, it was not ambiguous. 100%. For a Jewish person, Israel is your home, the home.
We're passing the microphone around.
Hi, I'm just curious. The illness that you spoke of that he had for a long time, is that the stroke that he suffered?
Yes. No, I say he was ill for a long time. I don't remember exactly the details, but I remember that I started working, in newspapers. They always prepare it in advance, and it's kind of morbid. But between us, I started working on my piece on my obituary, my piece on his life. I started working on it in 2019, and he died 5 years later. So he was very ill for 5 years.
And how old was he when he ultimately passed away?
He was in his 80s, I think.
I don't recall.
Yeah, I think he was.
I'll Google it right afterwards.
Late 70s, early 80s. Yeah.
The humor also, you're saying he's very Zionist, and I see that, but it also reminds me of Egyptian movies that we used to watch on Friday afternoons, the comedies that were silly, and it seems to me also from the Mideast kinds of films that were done in Arabic. It reminds me the same kind of humor. And also that he did the humor on his own and not in a leaka, in a group. Oh, it seems interesting that. Yeah.
I think that's his. He was also inspired by Italian films. He mentions the Sika, but that's the hyphenated identity of Revach and of many Mizrahi Jews in Israel. Their culture is Arabic, but their political view is Zionism. It's not mutually exclusive.
I don't remember if it's mentioned in the film, but of course he was a big supporter of the Likud party, of Netanyahu's party.
Yes. No, not at all. But yeah, he was. I think he also participated in the Likud, the Israeli Republican Party, political ads in the '80s. But he was the first. Just for today it's trivial. But just, for context, before the 90s, 99% of Israeli artists were left-wing. And he was the first and you can tell from the movie how mainstream he was. He was the first mainstream Israeli artist who publicly supported the right wing. And also in Israel, usually, I said he represented the Mizrahi culture. He represented conservative Judaism. He represented the right-wing political views. In Israel, it usually goes together. These different identities.
We'll take last two questions, one up there and one right next to her.
Good afternoon, Edward from Coney Island. Every week I'm attending a film festival as I deeply and passionately enjoy coming to these events. I wanted to know, was he self-taught or did he go on improv? And
Did you miss the beginning of the movie?
I know I sort of.
So they talked about he studied in Israel's leading acting school, and I didn't completely. He turned down a contract with Habima, which is Israel's. Then he would have been self-taught. He turned down actually a career with Israel's leading theater to go to school to actually study a little bit, and then moved back into acting in the theater.
However, he did not study. Once he turned director, he did not study filmmaking. He didn't go to film school for the simple reason there are no film schools in Israel before the mid-90s. And Kishon, for example, maybe the most important director in the history of Israeli film, was also Oscar nominated. I think more than once. He never went to film school, never studied film, because where would you study film in Israel before the 90s? So the pioneers of the Israeli film never studied film. They were all self-taught, as you beautifully said it. Yeah. Maybe you don't need to go to film school. Spielberg didn't go to film school. It turned out pretty well for him. Yeah.
Do you think that the fact that he was Sephardic gave him the ability to do what he did? And perhaps had he been Ashkenaz, it wouldn't have been the same?
But what do you mean by what it did?
It being the slapstick, that it kind of allowed him, because the culture was, it was looked down upon on a certain level, and he was kind of feeding into that. And had he been Ashkenaz, it might have been different. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's a beautiful question, and it's an ongoing conversation. To this day, one of the most one of the most important questions in the discourse on Israeli film is, a question that's continuously explored, and we still don't have an answer because there are, differing point of views. Are these films, do they reclaim Sephardic identity, or do they demean Sephardic identity? And it's an ongoing conversation. Are they empowering or not for the Sephardic Jews? And it's an ongoing conversation. There are opposing point of views. It's a very good question. I have an answer, but I think they are empowering. But it's just my answer. I will say that some of the talents involved with these films were not Sephardic. For example, Boaz Davidson, who's interviewed in the film, he lives in LA, since the 80s. He was Ashkenazi as someone can be. Kishon was, Hungarian.
I just looked up Yuda Barkan is Polish and Czech.
Yes.
So
yeah.
It's
Nitza Shaul. So it was there were different Sephardic and Ashkenazi creating these films together, which I think complicates this question. Because one reading is these Ashkenazi directors with the help of some Ashkenazi actors, and some Sephardic actors made films that humiliated the Mizrahi.
Some compare it to the black exploitation films of the 70s, and I think there's a lot of similarities there within the culture, and were intended. Ze'ev Revach's roles in most of them were like Yuda Barkan's roles were of like the good-looking guy who had all the brains, and Ze'ev Revach was often the comic relief.
Right. But he always had the upper hand, He always triumphed. The Mizrahi were always the winners. They always got the girl. They always got the money. So that's why I don't understand how someone can watch these films and not think that they're empowering when they're the ones who have the power. Okay, so they're silly, but they end up with the girl. So who cares if they're silly or not?
Yes. And I'll say one last thing, that in many ways he also unified. He was like that person that both from all sides, people very much appreciated and was really a beloved star, and became like, in some ways, a voice of reason. And especially in those last films of his, he was really, this voice that people looked up to as this, like, really a legend.
Yeah, everyone besides the film critics, but who cares?
Those critics, troublemakers. For sure, he definitely had a lot of support within the artistic community as well. Folks, thank you so much for being here for this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for seeing kind of something that actually most of you did not know about. Next up is The Vanishing Soldier. So if you have tickets, you're able to stay seated for those. If you don't, please make room, because we have a sold-out screening. And tomorrow, don't miss Cabaret Total. And we look forward to seeing you at other screenings. Thank you very much.
If you have tickets